Hello, welcome to this afternoon's session on Connecting Cities, Connecting Citizens. Last year, 54% of humanity lived in cities, and the number of megacities with inhabitants of more than 10 million people continues to grow. The same is true for scores of smaller cities as well, underlining the increasing importance of urban powerhouses. At the same time, information technology increasingly dissolves location and virtualizes human presence. This afternoon, 6 speakers, or if you look at this ring, perhaps 6 performers, explore this tension. Urbis aut orbis, city or world, or urbis et orbis, city and the world, or perhaps even a new hybrid form of half here, half there, connected cities. The first 3 speakers come from the world of information and interconnection. Divina Frau-Meigs, Takuya Nomura, and Joanna Faron-Ferraz. So first I'd like to invite Professor Frau-Meigs to take the stage.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Michael, for this introduction. I wanted to thank the organizers, Gerfried and Katarina, for asking me to come and to treat me as an artist, as the tag says, when in fact I'm only a sociologist, and this is the perspective I'll be speaking from. I'm not an urbanist, so you'll see me talking about what makes people want to live in cities and what competences are they going to need to live in smart cities. So it's an opportunity for me to ask all of us the question of the transition from soft to smart. And I propose, just so that you don't fall asleep and you have a few questions later, that smart is about adaptive, it's about cognitive, it's about networks, the strength of networks, and maybe also the shift from what we used to call the public, the citizen, to the community or the club. These are questions that are not settled, and I don't pretend that I'll settle them, but I think it has to be questions raised so as to understand what makes citizens smart and how we can go about it. So I have very little time, it's the fault of the organizers, and so my presentation is going to be like a teaser. I'm going to go very fast, you're not going to understand anything, and so you'll have questions to ask. But bear with me if you want. So I'll be speaking from a perspective of research, and from 3 or 4 experiments that I'm conducting right now. ANR Translate, which is a French project on transliteracies, ECHO, which is the only European project on massive online courses, Master EGM, which is the only master in France that is about the engineering of 21st century skills, and the chair that I have at UNESCO, where I try to think about the major domains of education 3.0. So, as usual with researchers, what is actually happening with young people? Are they smart? How do they show they're smart? How can we then transform that into competences in education for them so that it's not just happening in the wild, which is the case at the moment? And in my project on transliteracies, we look at young people in different spaces. And this is one of their spaces, that's their universe of information. And you can see that they have paper in the middle, they have websites, they have blogs, etc., etc. But basically, I hope you have the same impression about your own desktop. It's a mess, it's okay? And it's not organized in a recognizable way, except for those who have created that mess. And they do, because they don't think in a linear way, of course. But what is striking to us is that there is a continuum, in fact, of practices, online and offline, paper, not paper, etc. But what we notice is that these young people leave a lot of eclectic traces. They go on all sorts of platforms. They are basically always constantly interconnected, intercreative. They comment, they annotate, they curate, they remake, etc. So in a way, we can say that they're moving from being soft audiences, just sort of fan cultures, to smarter communities, because they are interconnected and they talk about the things they like, which is also things that they study at school, not just Harry Potter. So for instance, you can see an account on Babelio, which is a sort of an online library. You can see them blogging on different options, commercial platforms included. This kid is actually writing fantasy. And you can see that their spaces, these are urban spaces, are very varied. They used to have only one space to go, besides the school, the classroom, which is a public library or the library. Now they have learning centers, they have media centers, they have Fablabs, and they have online resources that they treat like a space. And so these spaces are social, technical, cultural, and what's important is that young people constantly define them. They're not public spaces for them. Inside a public space, as you see here, there's 2 or 3 groups of them. They create different kinds of communities. And it depends on the devices that they bring with them. What's important for them is that they are comfortable and familiar. If they are not, they quit. They don't have patience. And I should have patience. So we could say that a certain number of spaces today are changing in cities and in schools. They become smart spaces because of better ergonomics, tablets, because of mobility, because of better functionalities. And so what's important is that it definitely, and I hope this is not news for you, I'm just trying to make sure we have the same culture, that reading, writing, all the traditional skills are no longer individual and autonomous. They are constantly moving towards a collective practice. This girl who was reading on Babelio, she had 305 friends active. She's not an individual reader alone. So they are not just readers, they are commentators, aggregators, curators, producers. That's the smartness, that's the interconnectivity, that's the adaptability. And in fact, and this should reassure some people who are worried about their writing and reading skills, they're doing fine. I'm losing time, and I hope it will be given back to me at the end because of the machine being slow. So what we notice also is that these spaces, a lot of them, especially the online ones, are commercial. And the commercial logic is always there trying to capture them. But we see also that young people are able to modify these commercial spaces. They turn them into private and public spaces at will. And they move seamlessly between leisure activities, collective activities, entertainment, schoolwork. And also something that we discover more and more, and I hope today it will be spoken a lot about, mobility is impacting their activities. They do a lot of things while they are in transportation, for instance. So spaces for them are also the street, or buses, or trams. They recuperate all these places in a hybrid logic. So it's a lot about hybridity. But as a result, they are recuperating spaces that seem to be forgotten, like buses for children or trams. These spaces are more and more geographically interesting for them. And so we can come up with a kind of repertoire of strategies that they have. Multitasking, navigation, sampling, pooling, mixing, sharing, indexing, papering if you want. So this is what I would suggest is smart intercreativity. It's a continuous process. It's emancipated from paper, though it has not evacuated paper, and it's done with interoperable objects, which puts the emphasis right away, of course, in terms of policy, in terms of IT, about openness, open source, open code, so that all these tools remain interoperable. So if we try to transform this into training for them and for their trainers to make these visible to the educators, to the parents. How do we go about this? So for instance, here we'll be looking at a Fablab, which is about children who have quit school and coming back and getting degrees. But you see that we've had to move from a logic of equipment to a logic of experiencing, from a logic of documents to a logic of putting the child at the center, from a logic of stewardship, of keeping, patrimonializing things, to a logic of creating places for juvenile life. As a result, we as adults and professionals, we have to take into account all these hybrid practices because they show that it can bring back the children to knowledge and learning, if not to the classroom. So, of course, access is crucial, and I'm going to go fast about that. Access in Fablabs, in other kinds of spaces like this space here, maker spaces if you want. The need to constitute these spaces inside and outside the school, but without separating them, allowing a lot of circulation seems to be, for me, one of the most important things for the future of cities. These spaces today are still very much segregated. And so we have to move towards porous spaces, spaces that are not just ascribed to one mission or one function. So here, for instance, this Fablab here is both an agora, a workshop, a game zone, a cafe, a reading zone. It happens in all this, and it shifts. And young people will recreate by groups of 2 or 3 this solidarity among themselves. And this, I think, is the combination or recombination that we're going to see, which is going to do a bit like here, enable us to recuperate spaces in cities that were abandoned, that are enormous, that allow this porosity. This space here is porous. If you look at what's behind us, the exhibits, the people who keep circulating around, and I don't know if they hear anything, but it doesn't matter. They are mobile. And so this is all part of sharing, interconnecting, being intercreative. And so it brings us to transliteracy, which is the idea that we have to bring knowledge, pieces of understanding, pieces of competences from different domains that didn't used to speak to each other before. Most importantly, I posit, and that's what we're doing at ANR Translate, that digital transliteracies are about the convergence of 3 major cultures of information. The one about data, the one about coding, the info data one, but that's the one that everybody puts forward today. It's about coding. It's every country in the world is now asking themselves, should we just erase the curriculum and just put them down to code? I think not, but that's so that you can have questions for later. Media, because everything that we do in these spaces, a lot of this sociability is about communication and interactivity, and documents, which is to say, knowing how to use all these incredible productions that already exist online, mix, remix, etc., etc. When you do that, you get what I call smart presence. Not identity online, and that's something connected to e-reputation. That's commercial. When you educate young people and give them the transliteracies, what you get is a set of cognitive skills that are transversal. One of them is the fact that you self-actualize. You're constantly updating yourself, your knowledge, etc. And look at yourself and see how you do it every day. You who cannot disconnect from any of your smart tablets. But smart presence is also about live streaming, which is to say not working just at what is required in school to get a degree, but at what matters in your life. And it's not necessarily attached to a degree or your work. So you're not going to be identified as a person online just by your profession. Your taste, your leisure, etc. is going to be important. And curation plays into that, of course. And then there is a lot of modelization. For instance, here, this student of mine who put herself at the center, she started trying to trace all her competencies acquired through life. And the competency she acquired in my degree is the one on top left. So here she tells me, this is what I got from you, which is to say not maybe a tenth of who she is as a person. But who cares? It's very important that she's aware and she reshuffles all of that and she keeps being interconnected. And she sees herself as a sort of interconnected net, just as a person. And then what we notice is that once people have these skills and this sense of presence, they will engage. They will have enough self-esteem to implicate themselves in the city. It doesn't mean political party necessarily, so often not at all, but it means engaging with something out there, helping others. So these make a whole. So what can we keep? I'm still fine with time, 5 minutes, okay. What can we do? We who are the ones who are the passeurs, those who are trying to move from soft to smart, who are trying to bring these kids along in the new jobs, in the new cities, in the new forms of citizenships and networking. It's complicated. And I don't pretend I have the solution, but definitely, and that's what is most problematic today for decision makers, especially in the education world, it means a radical change in the curriculum, but really radical. And if the school system doesn't change, it will be marginalized, and it will be marginalized fast. So all these changes are here to stay. Smartness is not going away. So peers and professionals have to change their practices and modify them. And you see, it's not a drastic change, in fact. It's incremental. And if you anchor yourself in the idea that it's a hybrid process, you can monitor and you can go along the hybridization. So it's not a rupture. I'm not holding here a discourse of rupture, but I'm holding a discourse of change. And so it's important to establish training for trainers. And for instance, it implies everywhere in Europe in particular to modify the positions of disciplines in whatever program you have and be project-based. So if you see, those of you who can read good French, contents, which today is the major part of training of today's trainers, content in my chart here is only a fourth in the chart. In today's programs, it's 4/4. This is the nature of the change I'm talking about. And you see that I've separated what students bring and teachers bring, and it's half-half. And you see that it's impossible today not to take into account the socio-technical platforms. They are part of how we are smart. So we need to create these third spaces outside the classroom and the playground. We need to create these fourth spaces. These things already exist. What I mean now is we need a change of scale about that. We know it. Research shows it. We show it again and again and again. It is not reaching a stage where it's going to make a real change for cities, for countries. So it's important to be active in transforming that and putting transliteracy, this convergence between information, data, media, at the center of a project of Education 3.0. Because that's how you're going to push presence, intercreativity, lifelong training, etc. An experiment we're doing is with MOOCs. And we work on SMOOCs, in fact, on social, massive, open online courses. We have the only European project on SMOOCs, and we follow here our Canadian colleagues on that. And we've created 3 of them that are only about digital skills, 21st century skills. MOOCs are not about competing with disciplines. Universities are doing disciplines. We have to bring universities competences they don't have and they don't teach. So we complement them. We're not in competition in spite of what is being felt. And it's all about social construction. And you see, you bring all the media, text, graphics, audio, games, etc. You bring all learning models together. And you trust the peers and the professionals to work it out together in an intercreative way, in an adaptive way. But you have to provide all these models at one. And today with the technology, we can do it, even serendipitous knowledge. So you can go on www.ecolearning.eu. That way I'll gain a lot of time. So ECHO basically is trying to provide these smart competences, including participation and interaction. And what's important is that we are moving from the notion of classroom as a closed set of 25, 30 students in the best conditions, to a cluster in which people interact at different speeds with different degrees and intensities. And that is what makes them intercreative. They don't depend on one source of knowledge, and they keep going back. These MOOCs are open. Even when they're not animated, they're accessible, they are open source, and that's where we are at the moment. So I hope you see how this can benefit communities of learning, and beyond that, cities. Thank you for your attention.